What's going on, everybody? I recently covered the Body Elastics Flexicon resistance band machine that's coming out. I'll link that video down below if you guys are curious. But in that video, I alluded to the fact that many of the exercises you guys are seeing done on that machine can be replicated, not exactly, but at the very least taking some inspiration from that machine, and can be used on a basic squat rack. And to do that, you would just simply pick up some sort of band peg attachment such as these, which have been around for some time, but I don't think I've seen a whole lot of coverage, and I certainly didn't appreciate it once I just picked these up from making that video. I picked these up on Amazon. I'll link these down below. Fairly inexpensive, about 40-ish bucks. Rogue and some other companies do make them, but again, I think they're kind of a sleeper hit. Not too many people know much about them. Theirs are USA made, which is great, but it's like $60 for one. So I wanted to kind of get my feet wet, try this very basic pair, and I think for the most part, they do the job. And I do really love products like this because not only is it incredibly versatile and fairly inexpensive, it's also very small. So wait till you see some of the exercises or kind of things you can do with variable resistance and a very little attachment. And that was kind of the motivation for the collar hooks we designed for that same idea. So I'll link these down below. You'll see it featured in the video. Aside from attaching resistance bands to any 2-inch collar, help save the bands from, say, traditional stuff we used to do with resistance bands, attaching the band pegs to, say, a barbell, but of course using a resistance band bar. Something like this can also go hand in hand with these types of band pegs. So you'll see these things been used in conjunction for a couple exercises. I'll also go ahead and link some of the resistance bands and promo codes I have for bands down below in the description box if you guys are curious. Great thing of what I want to show you here is you guys can use tube bands or loop-based bands. Now, before we get going, a couple points of just safety here in general that I think are worth noting. Now, first, with this particular device, I'm really watching this thing because I don't know, it's fairly inexpensive, so I want to make sure that, you know, this carabiner holds up, doesn't get warped. Ideally, I like to probably get a bigger one over time. You can still put tube-based bands, you know, through this carabiner. You just got to make sure you don't, you know, nick the band because that's going to basically could possibly lead to a dramatic cut. Otherwise, you can loop the bands through here. And I think personally, this isn't going to cause much problem. The other thing that definitely can happen with attaching bands onto any kind of a rack, and you guys know this, and maybe devil's advocate, or people are just going to say like, well, we know you can attach bands to a rack, just simply, you know, loop it around here and make a knot. I will say, aside from practically, that doesn't work out too well because if you do that, it'll just slowly slide down the machine. Aside from that, the only few times that I prematurely snap the band almost immediately or fairly quickly is when I put it onto a squat rack. Now, whether that's from just gradual friction causing a nick or a tear, that can happen pretty easily, or maybe even like these little holes have some little, you know, nicks or some sharp edges to it that can also nick the band. Point is, you got to be careful. Of course, you could do that if you want to at your own risk, but that's where this thing comes in handy, not only holding it in place, but also safety-wise. So check your bands. One of the benefits of, say, Body Elastics tube-based bands is, while I'm not a big fan of tube-based bands in general, aside from the carabiners working out pretty good with this system here, the great thing about Body Elastics is that they have this little rope inside. So if something does break or the band does tear, it's not going to fly and hit you in the face. And that's probably one of the biggest risks of using resistance bands, especially to a high point anchor point, is that you're cranking down so much and this is likely going to fly and hit you in the face if it does fail. All that to say, basically check yourself before you wreck yourself on anything you're using with resistance bands. Now, this thing doesn't really need any kind of instructions whatsoever. It pretty much goes in, you put the little safety washer that's just gonna allow the machine not to kind of scratch up too much with this little pin, and you're pretty much good to go there. You can actually change stuff pretty much on the fly, and sometimes I don't even use this little thing. I think it's more, well, I think it probably is there for some safety, but really just to kind of protect the machine from scratches, I think, from this. Otherwise, this thing works really good kind of switching up exercises. Great thing is, of course, aside from all the different positions, you can put it in the front or, you know, back of, say, a post. If you got something that's got holes in the side, like a lot of squat racks do, all sorts of things open up your doors on where to attach various resistance points on a various machine attachment or, of course, cable handle type stuff you guys are going to see here. I don't want to make an exhaustive exercise video because I don't know how many of you guys actually really care about this topic, but I just want to get kind of the wheels spinning a little bit. First thing I'll say is you guys can essentially replicate any cable-based exercise using something like this. So curls, flies, press downs, pull downs, regardless of whatever type of band is your preference. If you have loop bands or tube bands, you can loop them a few different ways to kind of connect to different points. But basically anything you guys can think of or do with a cable, you can do with this type of attachment setup. That includes things like posting up on a bench for any type of exercise as well. So if you got a nice versatile bench, that works out. There are a few assisted based exercises you can do, and I'm sure I'll mess around with more in the future because I literally just got this week at the time of this recording. So things like assisted push-ups or assisted pull-ups, and all I would do, since I'm utilizing more of a monster band, and if you want to handle, something thick like this, say for assisted pull-ups, put it across the machine this way, which is a little bit more easier, less likely to have the band kind of hit you in the face, especially if you're doing like traditional top anchor type thing for assisted pull-ups, is just take the collar hooks, loop one side here, and then you can put the bands connecting to each other. Not only does this work out really well, but it allows you to use nice fat bands, also gonna help protect the bands over time as well. And that's what's kind of cool about this type of setup, because now you can really maximize and just have fun playing around with stuff you already had. So I tried my squat max along with the wedge. Always shameless plug, sorry, but these are linked down below with our promo code. I use those actually a lot, as with everything you guys see. If I don't like it, I'm not using it. But that works out really handy. You can do some squats. I didn't even try it yet, but you can imagine various lunging, deadlifting patterns you can do with a setup like this. But more recently, I just threw these things on and I was curious how these G15 or Force USA lever arms would work. And this actually works out really, really well, especially when I made this attachment point a little further back. So with this one, again, use the collar hooks just to anchor it. Might not be necessary, but again, just kind of preserve the band that you're using, but works again for tube or loop based bands. Tons of things you guys can do using a lever and variable resistance with one of these band pegs. And while I don't have one, I can only imagine that if you had a rack, especially a bigger, longer power rack, and you had something like a leg curl, leg extension attachment here, and you had these pegs kind of set up laterally on the posts at certain positions, you could create some really decent strength curve and tension alongside some traditional free weights, which is one of the great things about this. Of all the things I've shown you, especially something like this, you can add free weights along with that variable resistance. Just want to highlight a product that's been around for a while that I don't think too many people know much about. And I can see people that are really into door anchor setups with tube-based bands. I've said before, I find it very cumbersome. This I find is much just better, not to mention just the different angles you can fine tune things at, but I also would trust this more than a traditional door anchor setup. That's it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Thanks again for watching. Let me know what you guys think of it down below in the comment section, and I'll see you in the next video.